stop drawing leaves? Well, that's a nice thought, but what if we want to or we need to draw trees? Trees are an endlessly difficult subject for many people to draw, and often the problem is there's just so many leaves and they become overwhelming. Now, I've chosen a small tree here because it's going to make it easier to explain what's happening and for you to actually to see what's happening in the demo, because I've also chosen a tree where we can still see the leaves. If we were going to be tempted to try and draw the leaves, in a way it's possible with this tree because of the size of the leaves, the distance we are from it, and the light that's on it. But my suggestion is that trying to draw the leaves, whether it's feasible or not, is what sets us up to fail when we draw a tree. Because the simple truth is, the number of leaves on a tree is almost inevitably overwhelming. It's impossible to draw them. And if we could draw them, it would then be impossible to draw them in a way where we get the lighting effects on them and other visual considerations accurate. And we end up with something that looks overdrawn and, well, often overdrawn, but also at the same time oversimplified. The leaves can often end up looking like a pattern, like a leafy pattern, or just a tangle of scribble as we've lost patience and concentration. So if we're not drawing leaves, what are we trying to do? Now, you're watching this demo at real time. Unfortunately, my actual real-time video was corrupted, and so I've used another copy of the video that had been double speeded. So this is now slowed down by half, which is why it looks a little bit jagged, a little bit jerky at times. So I'm sorry about that. But I did feel that watching this in real time was important, because this is all about finding marks to create the effect of the leaves, of the foliage. And I think it's far more helpful to think of when we draw a tree as drawing foliage rather than drawing the leaves, because the very word foliage is a I suppose it's a collective noun, really, isn't it? It's a word that describes all of the leaves taken as a whole. And that's what we need to do, even if we can see individual leaves. We need to learn to see them as a mass of one thing. And now the challenge is, what marks will create the effect of this mass? So we're not just talking of the shapes of the volumes, of the various balloon-like shapes of leaves. We're also thinking of the edges. We're also thinking of the way the light affects things. We're thinking of the effect of some leaves being closer, some leaves being further, and so on. So let's start to actually talk about the marks I've been using to try and create the effect of the foliage rather than draw the leaves. And if you look at all the marks I've done, I don't think I've drawn a single leaf anywhere. And of course, the challenge is, at the end, will this look like a tree? Will there be any doubt that the things I'm putting ink on the paper for right now actually are leaves? Well, I hope not, but we'll have to wait a few more minutes to see for that. Firstly, look at what I've done at the very top of this tree, the very top foliage. Just a few little curly lines with shapes, and look, a few dots I've just put on, and a bit of hatching to represent where the sunlight can't reach the back of the foliage cluster. The shade, in other words. What I'm wanting to do is to create the effect, particularly of the bright sunlight on the leaves at the top of the foliage. And so when there's bright sunlight, we can see the form less. And so I've tried to create a more diffuse feel visually with the way I've done the ink at the very top. However, if we come down a little bit, we get some clumps of foliage that are actually in complete shade. and possibly even some shadowed areas as well. So I've used heavier lines, darker hatching effect, more lines close together, creating a blacker ink cover. And I've also done some negative space, if you want to have a look, to allow the branches that are in front of that to look more obvious. I've left a gap so that we can see a white trail through that foliage. And that's very important for creating a sense of 3 dimensions. And that would be very hard to do if I were drawing leaf by leaf, or at least trying to draw some of the leaves individually. But when I'm drawing the foliage as one mass, and I'm not thinking of leaves, I'm just thinking of an irregularly textured surface form, 3-dimensional bulbous shapes that have a rough surface because there are leaves poking out in various ways, more rounded in some parts, more angular in others. And now I'm thinking, what marks can I use to create the same effect? See, I'm not drawing leaves, I'm trying to create the same visual effect that I see in my reference. In fact, I'm translating, if you like, the camera language into an ink pen language. In fact, a color printing of the camera image into black ink marks on white paper. So obviously I can't copy the photo, I can't copy the detail, I can't create what's there. I'm trying to say the same thing in a different way using a black pen. And these marks that I'm putting right now on the paper are the translation language. I'm trying to say the same thing, but use different words, different phrases, maybe even a different grammar system in parts. Notice, just since we're drawing a tree, notice I actually started with the foliage, and the branches I'm doing from the top down. It's really common that we draw branches and trunks from the ground up, and I've found in my experience, both from my own drawing and the drawings of other people I've seen, that it's very, very difficult to estimate the correct width of the trunks and the branches as they move up. And we end up very commonly with branches that are far too thick for the distance that's between the branches and the end of the canopy. If we look at the left-hand branch, or trunk if you like, it's just a small tree obviously, that I'm hatching some shading on now, some shadow on now, and we follow that up right up to the highest point of foliage, we can see that there is a regular narrowing of the width as the branch extends, as it goes into areas where it hasn't been growing for as long and it hasn't had the chance to become as wide or to grow from the tip. And we've got to get that proportion of the lower width, the upper width, and the distance between correct. And that's much, much easier to do if we start where the branches are really thin, where they're basically a line, and move downwards. Notice also I draw my branches in sections. I'm not doing long snake-like movements because it's very hard to line up each side correctly. And it's also very hard that way to get the bends and the turns looking realistic. So what I tend to do is I treat each section of a branch or even a thick twig as a cylinder that bends and is joined by either a corner or perhaps a more gentle curve, and then I join that link in, and I find that's a lot more helpful. Look at what I'm doing now. I start my foliage first, and now I bring it back down to where I've already been drawing the tree. That means I can position the end of this branch in the right place. If I were to just keep going up from what I'd already drawn, it would have been very easy to either stop too soon or go too far and change the sense of the shape and the proportion and maybe even the scale of the tree. So by establishing how far we want the tree to go at the edges and then working back inwards, we can maintain the same scale far more easily. Now, with a tree, there is flexibility as to not having to do things exactly the same. But if we've really liked the composition of what we're drawing, then we still want to try and capture it fairly well. Notice how as we get to the edges of my tree, my line work becomes much less. If you compare the branches I've just done in the lower right section compared to the upper left section, you can see that the branches almost disappear at times because I've drawn them so lightly and the end of the pen was barely touching the paper. That mimics the reality, what we see in real life when we have bright light striking branches sometimes, or twigs, and one side is lit up very, very brightly in exactly the same way some of those upper bits of foliage are. And that makes that, well, it depends partly on the sky colour and what's behind, but it can make that branch look less substantial just for a part of it. And so they're the little nuances of how things look in life that we want to try and copy in our mark making to create a drawing technique that does mimic those little visual irregularities, because those all add together to make my drawing look more realistic, even if it's not obvious. And therefore, learning to make marks on the paper that are quick and brisk and light. See, I hope you're paying attention to how I'm putting these lines, small lines on the paper now, where I start, where I finish, how I'm lifting the pen off the paper with a flick to get that lighter end. Now, sometimes a branch is broken off and we're happy to have a heavier end point of that branch or twig, but usually they're getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and we do want to try and show that to create that. Now, there are some very different leaves down below, and make sure you pay attention for them because I do handle those differently. Please hit the like button if you're enjoying this. I do have a trees playlist that has, I think, almost 100 videos on it, which is lots and lots of different types of trees, from eucalyptus trees, gum trees, since I live in Australia, to palm trees and fir trees and pine trees and spruce trees and just oak trees, just general, and branches and all things vegetation. So there's flowers and pot plants and grass, and how to draw all of these things relating to the natural growing world. So if trees are a problem, or if they're a joy to draw but you just want to get more experience and some more ideas and have some subjects that you can draw as well as demos to watch, then check out my Drawing Trees playlist. So again, notice that I've been adding hatching and some extra lines to indicate the shadows that are being cast on these branches. And now I'm moving to, I think it's what we call a black bean tree. But here now I am actually drawing some leaves, basically. I'm actually suggesting some leaf shapes. I'm doing that because these leaves are much larger and we can see the shape very clearly. So what I need to do is I need to draw some that kind of set the feel, but I have to stop sooner rather than later. I don't want to end up starting to draw all the leaves that are in this the top of this tree, small tree. I don't want to start getting caught up drawing all of them, but I do need to do some to see so that we get a sense these are very different. And then the parts that I draw less exactly of this lower tree, our brain will be able to just presume that it's all the same thing, and it will actually put more detail into our perception of the marks than I've actually created. Remember, this is my actual drawing time. This little drawing took me less than 20 minutes, I think about 18 minutes to do it all. And so in my mind, this is a nice little sketch. And again, have a look at the tree that I've drawn already above, and just look at it, and you won't find leaves there. And yet, I think it's a pretty satisfactory effect of foliage, and it looks, I think, fairly realistic, which is not bad considering I haven't tried to draw a single leaf on this tree. And so doing some hatching as well to represent shadowed areas. But again, even though we can see more detail of the foliage down here, I'm still in the end trying to just capture the effect of the foliage, and particularly the light and dark areas as well. I don't want to start drawing individual branches with careful leaves on them. But I do want to get the shape of the leaves, and particularly when we have a bunch of leaves almost in a frond-like arrangement, the shape of the frond, the way these bunches, hands of leaves hang and droop down, and the way they narrow at the end. These things are important as well. So now I'm doing even less drawing of foliage, but I'm still drawing trees. I'm trying to find marks to represent the foliage that's in the background behind what we're looking at, and help create a sense of depth, of distance between the foreground and the foreground. And of course, the main subject, this tree, is in the center of it more. So I'm using a Copic multi-liner pen for this, and I think it's a 0.3 millimeter. Notice I'm trying to get a lot of variation in the weight of my lines. I'm doing these very lightly, very quickly. And if we just look overall, we can see that there are some really quite heavy inky lines and marks, and then there are some very light ones that almost disappear on the paper at one end. And that's important, I think, to help create the variation of clarity with which we see things. So now I'm in the final stages, the mopping up, where it's really having a look at, are there any areas of value, of darkness I need to darken more? Are there any edges I need to soften or add more variety to? And when we look at a tree such as this, it's also important not to see it as a two-dimensional shape, but to see it as a three-dimensional form, and to realize that some of these branches are coming towards us and some are moving away from us. We're not seeing them all on the same plane. So now I'm doing some more generalized hatching to get a sense of the green color being darker than the sky behind as well. But I still do want to leave some little white bits as well. What do you think? Why not have a go drawing this? I'll post this reference on my channel post page. If you'd like to have a go drawing it yourself, there'll be a link in the description to that reference if you want to follow it and draw it from there. I suggest you watch the video, try and understand my process, and then have a go drawing it yourself without actually watching me draw at the same time. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope this has been helpful if you find trees difficult, but also just as a technique for drawing anything. So why not have a go? I really love drawing trees. But in the end, whatever you like drawing or don't like drawing, and however you draw it and however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.